So what's the key to solving the problem of youth unemployment? Katie Acheson is chair of the Australian Youth Affairs Coalition. She's here in our Sydney studio. And Dr. Patrick Carvalho is an economist based in the US. He's a former research fellow at the Centre for Independent Studies, where he penned a major report last year on Australia's youth unemployment, in which he argued that penalty rates often penalise the most vulnerable job seekers. He joins us from Washington. Thank you both very much for the discussion this evening. Perhaps first to you, Katie Acheson. A lot of people would say to the young people that they saw in Jason's story earlier on that they're setting the bar too high, that they're not trying hard enough. What do you say to them?
I think it's really clear that young people really want work. They want jobs, they want the opportunity to have jobs, but what we haven't got is entry-level jobs that we might have had even 10 years ago. Those jobs for them to get their first step in the door aren't there anymore.
And what about, so what then are the obstacles for them getting through that door?
Well, at the moment we have an education system that's planning for the kind of jobs that we're not going to see in the next sort of 10 years, automation of the job market, sort of the globalisation issues and the casualisation of the workforce. They're all sort of working together against young Australians who are really trying to get jobs but they just can't get a foot in the door.
Dr. Carvalho, what do you see as the biggest hurdle for people, particularly young people, getting into the workforce?
I think the biggest hurdle is actually that we need to grow the economy to create jobs, and it's something that it's a broader conversation that we need to have in Australia. For example, to implement structural reforms that can actually be implemented and create jobs. Because in the end, this is a type of problem that you need to grow out of it.
So structural reforms, what are you talking about specifically there? Tax cuts?
I'm talking about a broad range of reforms. I'm talking about competition reform that has been stalled since its release 2 years ago. I'm talking about taxation reform, and I'm also talking about workplace relations reform, of course. And as you mentioned, the penalty rates, at points, they do penalize the most vulnerable in our society, because if you look at, depending on an entry-level job in hospitality, on a public holiday, for example, can go up to above $50 an hour for someone that has very low skill and close to none experience. So we look at that. We need to understand that there is a price in the market that needs to be matched. So if you put very high bars in terms of entry, you're gonna take all the opportunity that low skill workers, such as youth, can get into the market.
But are youth prepared to accept that? I mean, we do have jobs in Australia that are, low wage and often in difficult conditions. They're often taken up by backpackers, as I was just speaking to Matt Canavan about. But Australians, it seems, don't want those sorts of jobs. Do they need to change their attitudes?
Definitely, there is a change in attitude that is necessary, but we have to understand as well that once you step up as a society, and we put that, for example, on a Sunday morning, if you want to work in a cafe shop, you need to get paid $40 an hour. That can be done maybe in Sydney and Melbourne, but that can be very hard to maintain in regional parts of Australia. And that's what we see here. I do believe there is an attitude problem as well, but I also have trust that a lot of young people, they are genuinely trying to find a job, and they're finding obstacles and hurdles on the way to get it.
Katie Acheson, do you believe the answer lies, at least in part, in paying young people less?
I think cuts to wages is cuts to life quality, and young people are going to be disproportionately affected by penalty rate cuts because they're the biggest population of workers in these sort of industries. And so it's not really a good idea to start with trying to make more jobs for young people by cutting wages for the industries where they get the most amount of work. So I wouldn't say that this is a good start, and it really is looking at penalising young people once again, and the evidence is a bit mixed. I think there's an argument for it, but what we see is that often it moves the jobs or the money into the cities and away from the region, and as we're talking about today, we need work in the regional areas for young people.
Well, we are expecting a result from the Fair Work Commission on penalty rates pretty soon, actually. Dr. Carvalho, your report for CIS here in Australia recommended the government should introduce local discounts to nationally regulated pay floors. Now, that sort of sounds a little confusing to many Australians. Can you just explain to us what that would mean and how it would actually work in practice?
Indeed, this is an OECD policy recommendation that shows that you can't treat a city like Sydney and Melbourne at the same par level in terms of pay that you would have in regional Australia. And that's what happens. So we look at, for example, in New Zealand, just across the border, the ocean here, we can see that in New Zealand they don't have penalty rates, and a lot of most of the coffee shops and business are open 7 days a week. That means jobs, right? So we need jobs to fight unemployment and youth unemployment in particular. So I understand, I'm all in favor for high wages for everybody, but we need to understand that wages, they need to be proportional to their skill level and to their experience as well. And when you put a high bar of $40 an hour, that's very hard to create a job for someone that's been out there without a job for years and probably a school dropout as well.
Katie, we saw in Jason's package there evidence that young people don't even know how to apply for a job. Are our schools and education institutions failing them?
There's a lot more that we can do. I think there are some really great programs in a lot of schools working with local communities and youth centres to sort of make sure that the programs are better targeted. But there is a lot more work that we need to do to get skills for young people for the new economy, and you know, the job market is changing and we need to change the way that we prepare young people for it. But we actually need actual jobs to do that. And I think the discussion we're having about rates and about how to do that is great. At the same time, we need to look at how do we get more permanent work, and what does the new economy look like, and how we're preparing the future workforce of Australia. And what that package shows is that we're not necessarily doing a good job right now, and there's a lot of work to be done. Yeah,
and the business leaders in that story suggested economic stimulus could be the answer. How much of that, though, should come from government, particularly at a time when we are, you know, borrowing billions and billions of dollars every month?
Well, I think Patrick has agreed that wage subsidies for employers actually does work to create jobs. What we don't know is whether it creates jobs for a long term for a young person. So it might be an incentive to hire a young person at first, but not actually to keep them. But it does start creating jobs. And what we do need to do is start looking at different things like Patrick's talking about to say, what are the ways that we can start stimulating this entry-level space so that young people can get the skills so that they can progress in their careers.
And what ideas, if it's a difficult problem, but as we heard there, we know that particular cohorts of young people, for example, 26% of Aboriginal young people are unemployed. Dr. Carvalho, you know, do we need to focus more specifically on particular groups of young people?
I think that particular groups, they need more attention and help and assistance from the government. But more than that, we need a broad system of reforms, as I said before. If we tackle taxation reform, competition reform, our fiscal imbalances that prevent states from acting efficiently, that it's the best way to get a job. So it really appalls me that in the past year, the biggest policy reform that we're talking in Australia is about a plebiscite. That's something that the parliament could do. Instead of talking about how to create jobs and how to do that is by implementing a lean taxation system, a very competitive job market that can actually create jobs and get a leg up for all these youth unemployment that we see there. So that's the only way we can talk about this problem. Youth unemployment is a problem that we need to grow out of it. We need to grow the economy in order to create jobs.
Dr. Patrick Carvalho and Katie Acheson, we are out of time. Thank you both very much for joining us.
Thank you.